Are you ready to dip your toe into the podcast pool? D2C brands are all over podcast advertising, and now marketers are more pod curious than ever. In this session, we'll have two leading D2C brands tell us what's worked and what hasn't in this evolving channel. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. Martha Gallant, Senior Director of Audio Partnerships at Athletic Greens, Cassandra LaPrairie, Marketing at Wise, and moderated by Liz Horowitz, founder at Sonic Strategy Consulting.
Hi, and welcome to How Podcasts Have Transformed Audio Advertising. So audio advertising has transformed over time from traditional radio to music streaming platforms and, among other things, on-demand marketplace of spoken word content with the explosion of podcasting. There are currently over 2 million active podcasts, and investment in podcast advertising is projected to cross the $2 billion mark by 2023, according to the IAB. So there is a lot to learn. And fortunately, we have two marketing professionals who have done that hard work and are going to share their expertise with us today. So welcome to Martha Gallant of Athletic Greens.
Thank you.
And Cassie LaPrairie of Wise.
Hello.
Appreciate you being with us today. So let's start with some background about your company, about your role, and also speak to previous roles where relevant, and just to give us the scope of your work in the audio space. So Cassie, I'll turn it over to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with where I'm at now. Right now, I'm part of a company called Wise. And if you have not heard of Wise, Wise is essentially building the best way to move money across borders. So whether you are sending money to another country, whether you're spending while you're traveling abroad, making and receiving international business payments, we're on a mission to make your life easier and to hopefully save you some money. If anything, just make the whole process a lot more transparent. So at Wise, I sit as part of the marketing team, and specifically, I run the audio advertising program, which for the past 2 years really has been one of the quickest growing marketing channels that we operate. So it's going well, that's good. How I got there, how I landed there, I actually made my start in the world of audio when audio was having a year. So I started in 2014 at National Public Media, which is the national corporate sponsorship arm for NPR. In 2014, you might remember, was the year that Serial put out its first season. So definitely a moment there. And then also for audio advertisers, that was when MailChimp made the best marketing decision unbeknownst to them in a long time. So after that, I moved on to Vox Media, and that was when Vox Media was in the process of really doubling down and expanding their own podcast network, Vox Media Podcast Network. So I joined the revenue team as the first dedicated audio salesperson to sort of work with their established revenue team to start talking about the power of audio more broadly with their clients, and then made the leap brand side with Wise.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My name is Martha, and I run the audio team at Athletic Greens. And if you haven't heard about it on a podcast already, Athletic Greens is kind of your all-in-one nutrition supplement covering all the different bases. So it's kind of a multivitamin meets gut health supplement, prebiotic, probiotic, adaptogens for brain focus, and all these really, really great things. So basically the CEO of our company had some chronic health issues, ended up on a program that cost like hundreds of dollars a week to give him all of the necessary things to keep him healthy. And he thought, hey, this is a business opportunity, and turned it into a really simplified, high quality, but very, very comprehensive product that's basically, as far as I'm aware, the very most comprehensive health supplement there is out there, a total all-in-one solution. And we were really founded, with partnerships in mind. Tim Ferriss was actually which is one of the largest podcasts out there. He reviewed the first edition of our product even, And 52 product iterations later, he's still one of our large partnerships, and we've just been scaling. We really find that, especially in an industry that has kind of a lot of skepticism, having someone to kind of offer an explanation, have that 60 seconds to educate someone around a product, and say, hey, I enjoy it, my family enjoys it, things like that have been really effective in compared to other forms of performance marketing. So we've been having a great time. And prior to that, I was doing the exact same work over at Helix Sleep, a direct-to-consumer mattress brand.
Okay, terrific. So in your opinion, how has podcasting transformed audio advertising, and what does this channel accomplish that other channels don't?
Good start, happy to. So I'm actually going to answer that question. To me, I could answer that, how has podcasting changed advertising more broadly? And in a lot of ways would be my response. For me, in my experience, I think just the massive opportunity for brands to connect with listeners in a truly authentic but also targeted way. If this were a year or two ago and I were to say targeted and podcast advertising in the same sentence, people would probably laugh and roll their eyes, and that would be fair, but a lot has changed in the past year. But Liz mentioned earlier, over 2 million podcasts in existence. I mean, the community of, an increasingly diverse community of creators, of content, is just untapped, I think. And I think at Wise, we're just scratching the surface. So I think that for brands that are truly willing to put in the time and energy to understand the nuances of the medium, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to connect with listeners and consumers in a way that just doesn't really exist on other platforms currently. That'd be my big thought at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo that and add to it, I see podcasts as part of this whole creator economy, which is just enormous and fast-moving and incredibly powerful overall, like influencers and YouTubers and podcasters and just kind of thought leaders who are out here writing books, building brands, launching their own products. It's just this enormous thing to be a part of now. And the creator economy overall kind of shifted marketing, and consumers don't really want to hear you as a brand say, hey, look at me, I'm a nice product, give me a try. The future of, I think, people experiencing marketing is shifting more and more towards someone else offering your brand a warm intro, and that kind of moving over to your website and the sales funnel and everything. But I think that more and more people don't want to hear from you as a brand at all.
Yeah, and to add on that, I think too, like we as brands and as advertisers, I think play a much bigger role in the actual experience. So being at the center of this podcast content that people love dearly and turn to every single week, we actually have a responsibility to hopefully be additive to that experience, but at the very least non-disruptive. And I think that a lot of consumers now have, if not an appreciation, at least an acceptance for podcast advertisers, knowing the role that they play in sort of sustaining and bringing them the audio content that they love. So yeah, I think that it's just changing the way that a lot of brands, hopefully changing the way that a lot of brands choose to message to their consumers on that platform.
Well, let's continue with that thread, because host-read endorsement ads represent over half of revenue by ad type, demonstrating brands' desire to really tap into the influence that hosts have with their audiences. So I know Athletic Greens has utilized this strategy, so let's hear more about your experience with that process, maybe some do's and don'ts, and also talk about getting the creative right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to kind of disclaim that it's a huge luxury to be a product that you can kind of require or expect an endorsement on. Plenty of other products, some personal health items, or insurance or all these different things that also would do well on podcast advertising. Just logistically, it's incredibly hard to require or facilitate an endorsement. Luckily, I'm able to work with a product where if the host wants to do these ads, chances are they want to also enjoy the product. So we send out, we're extremely generous with just sending out tons and tons of product. It's part of our kind of almost like a sales funnel of developing a partnership with someone. So almost like we're trying to close a deal, except that the deal is us paying the podcast. Part of our process is always sending out product to develop the relationship and make sure that they're excited about it. And if they have any questions, we address them. People have the opportunity to speak to our nutritionist or doctor or a founder to really get connected to our story. So I think that the downside of that can just be it's a big task to onboard folks. What I listed out was a bunch of time. We have an onboarding call with them, and we also just kind of have to hand the reins over copy-wise because we have technical specifications and some guidance. We ask people to kind of share what Athletic Greens is, and we ask them to give a little bit of guided endorsement. When do you take it? What has it done for you? Do you take it every morning with a splash of almond milk? All these different things. And it's just more time and effort, but it's very, very fruitful for us in our unique circumstance of being a consumable product that people can easily have an opinion on. And copy-wise, this is something that we really want to work on because if you asked me a year ago, I would say, well, just give them really easy copy, give them pretty bare bones stuff, and give them a lot of free reign. And if they're a good host, they'll do a good ad read. And the thing is, there's plenty of hosts who don't feel like doing your job for you, and you should kind of put in the time and for a different genre or for a different creator, probably depending on the scope of the partnership, put in a little more time and set them up for success, detail out some talking points, maybe do some research. Do they have a partner? Can you work them in? And this is stuff that you would all discuss on the onboarding call. You can't totally put words in someone's mouth, but it's kind of a process of educating them about the product so they can educate the listeners about the product and just kind of letting them do their thing. It's hard to strike the balance, but we try to just give them a lot more freedom than we would give someone else. You're planning your Facebook creative, you just are in charge. You really have to let go and let these folks represent your brand how they represent themselves. That can be a little bit of a downside or a challenge if you're trying to be very, very brand safe. We've had some wild ad reads, especially working in the mattress industry and just all this stuff, but it's only authentic if you let them do it.
Right. All right, and Cassie, Wise has a little bit of a different strategy with a mix of both announcer and host reads. So, for example, on NPR's Fresh Air, you're not going to have Terry Gross reading ads for anyone. So how do you balance both approaches?
So I actually kind of think of those as two different parts of the same approach. For Wise, really what we're trying to do with our audio advertisements is create the most impactful message for the environment in which it's going to run. Martha mentioned earlier that it really depends on what is your product, what is your company trying to do. Wise's whole goal is a little bit different. Of course, at the end of the day, we want users to sign up for Wise and to use Wise. But we actually have a step before that we have to really make some progress with. Podcasting is somewhat of a low-intent channel for us because with sending money internationally, number one, you can't really manufacture the need for someone to do that. And even people that are doing that, we're kind of dealing with this whole problem of driving awareness around why what they're doing currently isn't really the best option for them. So if many people use their bank or PayPal or another provider that they're very used to, and people's money gets very emotional, right? We form very loyal ties to the companies we're used to help managing our money. So really what we have to do before we even convince people to try Wise is just to bring to their attention that there's a whole rate transparency issue happening if you do happen to send money abroad. And for that, we really need to position ourselves within that halo of trust and authority that either hosts or, if it's not a host voice, basically just make sure that how we're talking to listeners on the platform is consistent with what they're used to hearing, right? If we were to somehow, and NPR would never allow this, but if we were to get them to read one of our scripts and we say, we want your host to do this and we want it to sound just like this, that would, I imagine, be incredibly off-putting to those who are listening, because that's just not what they expect in that environment. That same listener may make totally different exceptions on a different podcast that they're used to listening to. But yeah, I always say that developing good ad creative is a little bit like maintaining a healthy personal or romantic relationship. You kind of come to the table. In my case, I say, listen, these are some non-negotiables. These are things that we really want to make sure we say about our brand and that we think are important to developing an impactful message. And then hopefully, if you're working with a helpful rep, they'll come back and say, I hear you, but how about doing this a little bit differently to make sure then that it maps back onto our non-negotiables, what our audience is used to hearing. So yeah, it's definitely a slightly different process, but I think all at the same aim, which is how do we create a message that resonates with this audience for our brand.
Right. Tying into the authenticity of that particular show and the host relationship with the audience. And if you tap into that correctly, then the advertising becomes more effective than it would be otherwise. So beyond advertising, there is a lot of buzz about branded podcast content. So is that a consideration for your company? And do you think it should be a discussion, a point of discovery for brands in general?
I think it really depends on your product and the goals for a branded show. I think what tends to happen is either a brand is ready to throw at least a six-figure budget into creating the podcast and then boosting it, right? Like, how do you hear about a podcast? It's usually from other podcasts talking about it. Those are ads. And so I know some large networks out there. People can go to iHeartRadio and spend $1 million and launch a podcast for Stop and Shop or whatever, but the listeners aren't going to stick around, and it's not really something that you can tie an ROI to if you're trying to take a performance perspective on it. I think there's definitely room for that in a company's brand strategy, but what I've learned from working with dozens and dozens of podcasters is you can't just expect people to listen to your podcast just because you have good content. So what's more likely to happen is you launch a podcast and no one listens to it. So unless you're kind of, let's say you're Salesforce, I would be very surprised if Salesforce didn't have some sort of podcast, and it's just hyper-targeted towards people who are currently using it or considering it or something like that. That could be really effective because you already are a thought leader. It's a B2B service, very, very targeted and specific. But I don't think that to participate in like the bountiful podcast space, anyone needs a branded podcast at all. There's 2 million podcasts out there.
So yes, Martha just touched at the real difficult part of this. So at Wise, we've spent a lot of time talking about this, and we certainly have not cracked the code. If anything, kind of having these circular conversations and realizing why our initial gut reaction was just totally dead wrong has helped us learn a lot. I think there is a big opportunity there, though, if you do it right. The challenge to marketers is that we have to kind of go against what we do in our day-to-day, and that is we have to take off our brand hats and put on like a creator hat, like an actual audio creator hat, not just a brand that's trying to make good audio, but truly an audio-first creator. And actually, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, I think the book is called Make Noise by Eric Newsom, but when we were starting this process at Wise, I read this, and he pointed out he made some very strong points about considerations that brands or anyone needs to make before launching a podcast. 2 of which were, number 1, what authority do you have to speak on this topic? So basically, why are you best positioned to lend your voice or your perspective on this subject matter or this topic? And then further, great, once you figure that out, not too hard, what is your unique spin on that? How are you going to do this in a way that only you could do or only your organization could do and that no one else has done before? That makes it a lot harder, right? I think a lot of people, when they go to make a branded podcast, are like, you know what, I think our head of product is incredibly fascinating, and he's a wonderful public speaker, and that may be true. But I'll tell you what, if you just rely on that to build a podcast audience, if that is your goal, right? If you're using this as a broader, mass outreach strategy, it's just not going to work. Because as Martha said, you are competing against not just branded podcasts, but all of the podcasts. So you have to think about yourself as duking it out with This American Life or, Fresh Air. I know that's not always true, but that's how you have to think in order to create something that I think audiences will want to listen to.
Right.
So.
I will add to that, actually. We had a branded podcast at Athletic Greens about 3 years ago, and we repurposed the transcripts of the episodes into very, very good SEO blog content. Totally worth it.
Yeah. Audio can be cross-platform. Yeah. So we've run out of time, and I have a very quick last question. What advice would you give to marketers, like our guests here today, who are ready to test podcast advertising? Because we've made it sound a little daunting.
I would say think about who your customer is, and just think about who you would want to give them an intro. Don't think about the very biggest podcasts. Those are very, very often very saturated and can be tough to kind of carve out a niche in. Go for smaller shows. There are also, in addition to the big podcast agencies that do all the buying, there's a lot of really small ones cropping up, and some really, really strategic folks there doing good work. So get help if you need it, but just kind of dive in and start with some small partnerships and be really collaborative to work with. These are human beings who like a good working relationship. So just kind of build one partnership at a time. Commit to a certain amount of testing every month, and then over time you build your budget, because you keep the performing shows and you add new tests, and before you know it, it's a core marketing channel.
2 quick things, I promise. So the first would be, this, in my opinion, in my experience, is not a channel that you flip on and see success with overnight. The barrier to entry is actually pretty low, so you could probably get a campaign live in just about that much time overnight. But there are so many variables that go into having a successful podcast sponsorship or advertising program, and it's going to take some time to figure that out, and I think that's totally okay. But I think going into that knowing that this is something, number one, you just have to understand it's going to take me some time to figure out what my brand's creative should sound like. It's going to take me some time to figure out the genre of shows that work best and that get me closest to my target audience. It's going to take me some time to even figure out how best to flight my budgets, all of that good stuff. That's okay. Just manage your own expectations, and then also manage those of your teams, because what you don't want to have happen is just to say, this sounds exciting, let's try it, let's flip it on, let's not be specific about what we're looking to measure or honest about the fact that it might take a couple of quarters to get right. So that's one thing. The last thing is, this space has grown totally in the past 5 years, as we've heard, 5-10 years even. That said, it's still really hard to figure out, and one of the most helpful things for me, and I wish I had done this earlier in my career, is talking to other audio marketers. Martha and I are actually part of 2 now, at least 2 sort of informal networking groups that connect us with other audio marketers, and what I've learned in either those conversations or in those messages has been immensely helpful, and it would have taken me a lot of wasted money and a lot of wasted time to figure that out had I not just collaborated with other folks that were struggling with the same thing. So look out or seek out those opportunities and maintain them.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Martha. Really appreciate your wisdom today.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.